Charge me whatever amount you want. Put me in prison if you like. But on our own property to have church service, who are you to tell me no? I said, I invite all the policemen, come gather there. Come pray with us, kneel with us, sing with us. They said, by the way, you can't sing anymore because it produces too much moisture. I said, I don't believe in dry singing anyway.
I'm Chuck Black, and this is the Age of Ingenuity, our weekly chronicle of Canada's current innovation economy. And here's what's happening. The worldwide protests against arbitrary lockdowns are growing. They include a substantial 2,000-person protest over the weekend in Toronto, my hometown, which was mostly ignored by the local media. We're going to take a look at that, and we're also going to talk about whether or not we're really entering into a second wave of COVID.
And I'm Alan Calder, and I'll be interviewing someone who's had success at rolling back arbitrary edicts. We'll be talking with Brother Henry Hildebrandt, the pastor of the Church of God in Aylmer, Ontario. In May 2020, during the peak of the first lockdown, he managed to keep his church open when pretty much every other church in Canada closed. Now he wants to open back up the rest of the country.
And we're also going to remind everyone to like, to comment, to share, and to subscribe to support this vidcast on Patreon and on PayPal. And with that said and done, here are the stories we're currently tracking. Now, our first story is focusing on new lockdowns in Canada. It's the September 29, 2020 Windsor Star Post. Windsor City Council extends mandatory mask order despite protest. Now, the article notes that Windsor City Council extended a mandatory mask bylaw on Monday, earlier this week, despite protests and a long list of delegates complaining of draconian measures, touting conspiracy theories, and decrying rights violations for a pandemic that never happened. Now, the Post also noted that Council indefinitely extended the bylaw, which grew from an order Windsor Mayor Drew Dinkins enacted in mid-August under the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, a local act. Now, the Post finally notes that it's hard to find common ground for discussion, at least according to Dinkins, especially when most of the people who spoke against the motion deny that there was even a pandemic. And Dinkins, to his credit, he notes explicitly that he refuses to talk to anybody who denies that his course of action is correct. Now, the local story from Windsor comes on the heels of this September 29, 2020 CBC News post. Anti-masker broke quarantine to speak at Toronto anti-lockdown protest after traveling to Europe. I notice I mentioned in the opening that we had a fairly substantial protest in Toronto on Saturday this last weekend, and pro-freedom activist Chris Sakokia, I hope I pronounced that correctly. He's also known locally as Chris Sky. He's one of the organizers of the Toronto protest. According to the CBC News post, he was fined for violating the Quarantine Act. The article noted that Sky had spoke at an anti-lockdown protest in Ireland on September 12th. And that protest, we have in the show notes a September 13th, 2020 Irish Post article, which noted that it was a fairly substantial protest. But Sky came back. He spoke at this Saturday's protest. I think that was September 26th. And so the police charged him. He's supposed to self-isolate for 2 weeks according to the rules and the regulations. For his part, Sky responded to the Sun News post with a Twitter. I've got a link to the Twitter in the show notes below. And he said that the fine wasn't real. It was just for show so the newspapers could have a fun story. Sky said that both his first and last name were intentionally spelled wrong in the ticket by officers who presented him with the misspelling so that he couldn't challenge the ticket in court. It's not in his name. He can't challenge it in court. Sky also noted that the quarantine does not overrule the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which allow him to do this under the charter, and under which the ticket would likely be thrown out of court if challenged. He said he was actually disappointed that his proper name wasn't used on the ticket. He wants to challenge the ticket, but the police won't issue anything legitimate so he can go to court and figure out what's actually going on. And he even talked about this at the Dundas Square protest last Saturday, and you heard that, Al. What did you think of his presentation?
I'd hate to say he's bragging about it or even taunting the police who were there. They could have done anything there. Like, it reminded me, if you want to know the truth, of the Cherry Beach parties, though. The police are right there. You know, they didn't do anything except just make sure people weren't being drunk and stupid.
How about, I mostly agree with that, except for one weekend when the police said, we're going to shut everything down at 1 o'clock. If you're still there, we're going to ticket you. And then they didn't.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Don't forget, in the same sentence, and they were talking about this stuff, that he went over, we were dancing, he went over, talked to the DJ. The DJ said, they wanted me to say something to you that, oh, by the way, you're going to be fined if you don't leave here at midnight or something like that. But I don't go. Honestly, if you go, I'll just file this in court for you. Don't go. It's not worth it. They can't do this. It's not worth it. And I almost feel as if that's what the cops said to him.
I think you're probably right. That's a version of what he talked about on Saturday. It's a reasonably close version to what he wrote about on his Twitter feed. And Chris Sky, to be fair, is a character, very smart man, but a little bit of a character. I'd suggest, if you want to learn a little bit more about him, in a favorable light, you'll check out the August 12th, 2020 Rebel News post. Meet Chris Sky, local Toronto anti-lockdown celebrity. That article specifically mentioned that Sky, who's a real estate developer in North York, Sky is concerned over all the small business closures locally and around the world caused by government actions designed to mitigate the pandemic, but doing terrible things otherwise. I think he sort of really cares. I think it's interesting to note that he went to Europe during a period of their greatest protest, at least so far, and he's built some fairly substantive connections, which I think are going to serve him in good stead on October 17th, when him and some of the other people who are organizing the protest promised a really, really big show. I think it's also worth noting that the Trudeau government and others are using the threat of a renewed lockdown to justify huge amounts of new spending. And for this, I note the September 24th, 2020 Globe and Mail post, coronavirus update. Liberals move to extend emergency spending powers and increase new benefits. The article notes that the Liberal government has proposed measures to extend the use of COVID-19 emergency spending powers through at least the end of the year. We talked about that last week, and the idea is that by the time this thing is done, the Justin Trudeau government will have given away $1.5 billion. No, I'm sorry, $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion. Who knows how much money will end up getting spent over the next little while.
Until we're broke, you know, and then he's bribed the population with some of their money.
Yeah. But it's obvious, at least in Canada, there's money behind these ongoing lockdowns, and the funding is encouraging the local premiers to increase the restrictions. Most recently in Montreal, as noted in the September 28, 2020 CBC News post. COVID-19 surge forces new lockdowns in portions of Quebec. Ford government in Ontario is also still making noises about extending the lockdown restrictions, as are other provincial leaders. My dad is in Alberta, and he's saying that there are noises about locking down Alberta again. And I find it really, really frightening. And I'd like to talk about the science.
Well, exactly. Like, that's the problem, is everyone wants to talk about the science until you want to talk about the science.
Yeah. I would argue that The best science I have seen to date about the pandemic is from a statistical engineer named Ivor Cummins. He put together a September 8th, 2020 YouTube post under the title Viral Issue Crucial Update, September 8th, the science, the logic, and the data explained. We'll include a link to that in the show notes below. And he argues a whole bunch of really, really obvious things based on the available data, not modeling, not assumptions about what the future is going to be, but statistical analysis of what has actually happened. And his first conclusion is that the advanced modeling estimates of the ratio of COVID-19 deaths to any specific total population was an order of magnitude higher than the actual deaths which have so far occurred. The models were anticipating a 5% death rate, literally billions, people dying on the streets. And the world was thrown into panic based on these modeling estimates, and which were essentially guesses. They turned out to be wrong, and not just a little bit wrong, but massively wrong by an order of magnitude. And
Sorry, Chuck, did you hear that story about, I think it was in the States, how possibly the States, but maybe someplace else, where they were suggesting it was someone had a 1 and 0 issue when they had first estimated the numbers then? So
yeah, they put in a 1 instead of a 0 or something.
Yeah, like honestly, Chuck, like how, with billions and billions of dollars, they don't have a boss looking over this stuff? Seriously.
Or even a copy editor. If they had a copy editor, maybe we wouldn't all be so locked down.
Or a doctor to tell them they've lost their mind, and this is not what science looks like.
Yeah. To be fair, this isn't the only conclusion Ivor Cummins drew. He came to a second conclusion. The ratios of death to overall population for most of the countries involved in our current pandemic are all about the same. They all are the same percentage of the population as the virus works its way through the population. No matter which mitigation strategies are used, these include lockdowns, these include mask wearing, these include social distancing. No matter what was attempted, the curve and the population, the percentage of deaths to population, almost exactly the same. His logical conclusion was that the mitigation strategies used had no effect on the path of the disease through the population. You go.
And it's also funny how he noted the difference in was regional more so than what the virus did.
Yeah,
They followed the flu around was a better example than what they were doing to keep stats then. Like in the States is a big country, for example.
Yeah.
And some states it's the United States, have more in common with European countries based on their temperatures and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
I thought it was worth noting. Sorry, Chuck, go ahead.
No, you continue. You're absolutely correct. He notes strong patterns that are related to heat and humidity and influenza. He says that much of what happened with the real COVID pandemic mirrors things that have happened in previous years with the influenza epidemic. His third conclusion is that the overall amount of deaths recorded during 2020 has so far been similar to previous years, as were the causes of death, but only if COVID is assumed to be just another type of influenza. Overall, there has been no increase in deaths for 2020, at least up until now. Isn't that wild? It's almost like we stopped counting influenza deaths and started counting COVID deaths.
Just change the ones and the zeros.
Yeah. In fact, if COVID is assumed to be a fairly standard influenza virus, then its worldwide infection and death rates follows a pretty standard pattern common with influenza, with a spike in cases in the winter and after first exposure, and a slow fall off as summer begins. As with most influenzas, testing over time will uncover a false second wave of people who have had influenza previously, but retain portions of the influenza virus in their system. And this portion of the influenza virus retained, the dead portion, is something that creates false positive using PCR-based testing methodologies that are used throughout the world for COVID testing and used explicitly in Canada. We talked about that weekend.
Oh, and they're so terrible as well.
Yeah.
And so,
he noted that doctors call this a casedemic, an artifact of PCR testing, but not reflected in actual illnesses, actual hospital admissions, actual deaths. He also suggested the infection and death rate is slightly different in tropical areas, which is typical of influenza viruses, which are slowed by warm weather and sunlight. So as you can see, the more we get into this, the less dangerous COVID becomes, and the more foolish all these mitigation strategies seem to be.
And I guess people will need to start balancing the harm of the lockdown on this compared to the epidemic that they're hoping is still going to happen.
Absolutely. I think they're hoping for an epidemic to happen. And if you listen to the argument on the video, the gentleman argues quite explicitly that there will be a false second wave in October, November, and December. He says that false second wave is caused explicitly by a ramp up in testing. The more people you test, the more people test false positives. Most of those false positives mean the people who test positive are now immune from the COVID. It doesn't mean that they are in danger of a relapse or anything.
No, I agree. It doesn't make any sense for us. It makes sense for them statistically to control the herd, I guess.
I don't know why. I think it just, politicians are supposed to be generalists. They're supposed to know a little bit about economics. They're supposed to have some people skills. They're supposed to know a little bit about budgeting and financing. They're supposed to be able to judge the experts so that people can draw the proper conclusions. I think that in this case, the experts overwhelmed the politicians. Maybe they had budgets from different sources. Maybe they were funded by somebody. But they overwhelmed the politicians, caused the politicians to doubt their skill set. And that to me says that the politicians who doubted their skill set and defer almost completely to the so-called experts, they're not the people I want to represent me.
Well, here we are, Chuck. I'm speaking with Brother Henry Hildebrandt, the pastor of the Church of God in Aylmer, Ontario today. Last Saturday, he spoke in front of a large crowd of anti-lockdown freedom protesters at Dundas Square in Toronto. Good afternoon, sir. It's very kind of you to talk with us.
So when, as we all know, 2020 has been a very, very different year. It started off us not knowing what was ahead of us, obviously. And then when we, in March, when it started to come up regarding the coronavirus, then it came up that the authorities said that, or they were basically asking the churches, would the churches be willing to help us flatten the curve, as they call it, right? And we were part of that to say, absolutely, will we cooperate and help? Why would we not? I mean, if it helps to flatten the curve, 2 weeks, we can work around that, right? Well, we found out very, very soon and very fast, we found out that that wasn't the case. We are not talking 2 weeks. And then we quickly became very inventive and we said, well, we need together. We don't want to, of course, we are familiar. People thought maybe we didn't know about broadcasting or live streaming. We are very well familiar with that, but that doesn't replace gathering and seeing one another and being able to wave at one another. So we thought, we had heard that in the United States that certain groups would have a drive-in service, and we weren't familiar with it at all, had never done it before. But we thought, hey, that's a thought. I mean, we can all pull up on the parking lot. We'll keep our windows closed. Definitely better than sitting at home and just listening to somebody. So we started that. And of course, the police showed up right away because it seemed, according to the emergency law that was put in place, it seemed like, well, there's a gathering happening there. So they came and they checked it out and they saw that we had our windows closed the whole time, and that there was signs saying that, and that nobody was allowed to get out of their cars and whatnot. So they actually showed us thumbs up and said, looks good, it's a good invention. So that went on for 2 Sundays like that. But then the second Sunday we did it, then they got a lot of calls and people wrote in Facebook and said, how come, in other words, why are they doing it and the rest of us are shut down? So then the police figured that, well, I guess we'll have to shut you down. And that's when we said, no, I'm sorry, we don't want you to shut us down because we are not breaking any law. All we are breaking is the interpretation of a local police chief's opinion of the law. And we continued on, and they threatened us that we could be charged, but we went on anyway. And they came there and filmed everybody as they pulled up in the parking lot, and during the whole service filmed me as I was preaching and whatnot. But at that point, we didn't really care because we had already heard from numerous law firms that said they would absolutely and very gladly represent us at no charge at all. They said they are doing nothing wrong. So we had nothing to worry about. And then the police changed their mind shortly after that and said they would not be charging us. And then Premier Doug Ford changed the law, the emergency order, and said that drive-in services would be allowed. That's kind of in a nutshell, but feel free to ask me if you need some details.
Well, so no one was charged or anything there at your church service then?
No one was charged. We have not, up to this day, we have not been charged for anything.
All right, that's good then. Now, also you had mentioned at Dundas Square that if all the pastors were here today, we would quickly put an end to this. Why weren't there more pastors like you there on Dundas Square?
So my understanding is, and of course I've had a lot of correspondence in the last months with pastors nationwide, and not just nationwide, actually internationally. So there is a thought there that pastors think that according to Romans 13, which says that we're supposed to be obeying the government, they feel like that this would fit in there. They feel like if the government says shut the church, then we should shut the church. If they say we're not allowed to have church services, we should not have church services. So that puts a lot of pastors in that category. And then another category would be where they are afraid, they don't want their people to be charged or whatever. They feel like that they don't want to do that. And of course, like you mentioned earlier, when we were there on Saturday, we really didn't fit in with the crowd in that sense. It kind of seemed awkward. Why would a church group be here? But I personally feel very, very responsible. And there's a lot of pastors that feel the same way nationwide. But I think it's just a time of waking up, a time of them realizing, oh, they are deceiving us. There's no light in sight that they will let us freely worship again and have our religious freedom as our charter would specify.
Yeah, well, that's what I would assume too. I mean, that's why you did, in fact, bring a copy of that to the protest as well, where one of your colleagues held it up then as well, as also that you pointed out. And you're very serious about that. And I appreciate you for that as well.
It seems like, of course, we're not people that, we're not lawyers. Somebody asked us when they saw us at the protest, they asked, are you constitutionalists? Are you lawyers? I said, no, we're church people. I said, we do it for the spiritual reason that is in there, because the very first sentence in the charter says, whereas Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God. That's what we're standing on. And we're saying, look, God has given us the freedom. Governments give us rights. The government has no right to take away this God-given freedom from us. So that's what we're standing on. And that's why we brought the charter there, to make sure people are acquainted with it.
Well, smart move then too. And it also makes it so universal for Canadians or anyone in Canada, the charter. It's our document for all of us that every law should be applicable or applied to, for a test.
Correct.
We are. Right?
And an emergency law does not dissolve the charter. It has to be in a demonstrably justified manner. They have to present that to us, and they have failed to do so. Our government has failed from the top right through mayors and police. They are not working with us in a demonstrably justified manner, trying to say, look, we understand church is important. We understand where you're coming from. They are just clear-cut going through there saying, no, this is what it says. But we are saying the Canadian charter, and that's where the law firms and many other people are saying that we're absolutely right, because they cannot just annul the charter and say, okay, right now we have a supposed pandemic, so now the charter doesn't mean anything. That can't be done like that.
But here we are, right?
That's right.
That so I mean, do you have anything else you'd like to get out there then while we're on the air then, or not on air live but recording it?
Sure. So my burden is that people would not wake up too late. My burden is, let's look at it, what is happening. Look at it. I'm not a conspiracist. Let's just look at the facts. Okay. So back in March, they told us 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And then this, and then this. Back in March, they told us there was no significance, but when the death cases were the highest, there was no talking about wearing a mask. Okay. So why does it change when we know science doesn't change like that? Why does it change? My thought is to the people, wake up, people, before it's too late, before our freedoms are taken away from us. And we have seen it in history before that it happened. And we were all wondering, how did they let that happen? And my thought is, my encouragement to people is, let's not let it happen. Now it's our turn. Let's stand up for it in a demonstrably justified manner. Let's stand up for the God-given freedoms.
It's in writing.
It's
Right?
in writing. It's in writing. And our Prime Minister, my word to him is, like I said in Toronto, Mr. Prime Minister, your daddy signed it when you were 10 years old. He signed it.
Yeah, that was very well received as well. I noticed at Dundas Square.
Yes, sir.
You know, as I mentioned, it's a founding document for us that we all have to apply these other rules to, and so that's very important. You brought it with you, and I appreciate that. Now,
Yes.
I guess are we fairly well done here then, Chuck?
We're done. I really appreciate the final question you asked. If the pastor had anything in particular he wanted to bring out, I would ask, question number 2, I would ask that again. Most of us were expecting to protest, not worship at Dundas Square on Saturday. I know I was expecting to protest. What were you hoping to do, sir? What were you hoping to accomplish when you spoke?
So if you were listening to my speech, you noticed that it was not a regular per se sermon. It wasn't a regular sermon. It wasn't started with a scripture and then the scripture was divided up and then go on to the next scripture. It was not really a sermon, but it came from the heart of a concerned preacher about our God-given freedoms. And that's why in that speech, you heard me talk about things of the day, whether it's Bill Gates or our premier, whatever, which would normally not be in a sermon. So it wasn't, I would not consider it a worship service, and I wouldn't consider it a sermon, but I would consider it a concerned preacher that is concerned for the God-given freedoms that God has given us and that are contained in the charter and for a reason.
Concerned and passionate as well, from what I recall at Dundas.
Yes, I am very passionate about it. I would have a hard time speaking about this in a monotone voice. I'm passionate about it, and I trust that it was received, that it came from my heart. I felt like it went from my heart to the people's heart, and that's exactly what my passion is about it. Just that we've got to keep this going.
Well, from where you were on the stage, did it look like people were receiving your message then?
100%, much better than I expected. Like was said earlier, people could have perceived it well. They look at me, how I'm dressed, and it's like, well, that's a preacher. We came here to a protest. But I felt like the minute that I started speaking, they connected with my burden. They might not even have known what to call it. And like I said, it was confirmed that when the people spoke to me afterwards, they received it very well. And I felt very, very welcome and I felt well received. Many people spoke to me even during the walk that we did, during the march that we did, and thanked me for the passion for this and said that they feel exactly the same way.
Well, thanks so much for that then, because that's exactly how I felt, and I would confirm that's how everyone felt there.
I agree 100%. You were very well received in the group on Saturday. We hope to see you again.
I hope so too. And my goal is to go to more of those for the sole reason to convince people, look, this is what this country is founded on. And if we let go of the pieces of the foundation, what will be like left of the building when we're done?
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, we are going most Saturdays to Queen's Park for the similar but smaller services then.
All right. And I am scheduled to be back in Toronto October 17th. I don't know if that needs to be on here or not, but anyway, then you know.
Oh, well, that's
It
good.
should be. You go. My understanding is that October 17th is a big protest. Hopefully they're looking for 3 or 4 or 5 times the size of last weekend.
That's my understanding.
Yeah. And they announced some other notable speakers then, and yourself, well, you would fit right in with them, to be honest, and that's a compliment to you.
Thank you so much. And I'm actually speaking, like whenever you hear me speak, I am representing God. I am representing the Bible. That's what I see in the charter. Like I said, the very first line that it says there, the supremacy of God. That's my burden. I respect what other speakers are saying, but like I said, I'm representing. That's what my burden is, to represent God and the Christians in a proper way.